Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a Paris rarely seen in postcards, a city wrapped in the unforgiving grip of a medieval winter. It's the tail end of November, 1456, and the air itself feels like a shard of glass against your skin. Snow isn't just falling, it's a swirling, blinding white chaos, driven by a wind that seems to shriek with pure malice. You're there, trudging through drifts that swallow your boots, wondering if that last street meat pie, a decision of pure desperation, was quite the bargain it seemed. You probably won't survive this particular Parisian holiday, let's be honest. Hypothermia was a pretty efficient Grim Reaper back then. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let us know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind, a living thing, snatches your breath away as you hunch deeper into your threadbare cloak. Each gust seems to find new ways to pierce through the wool, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke, frozen mud, and something else. Something acrid and ancient, the accumulated breath of a city that's seen too much. This isn't the Paris of twinkling lights and romantic strolls along the Seine. In 1456, the Hundred Years' War had only concluded 3 years prior, and the city still bears the scars, both visible and unseen. Resources are scarce, and the faces you pass, fleetingly glimpsed in the swirling snow, are pinched and grim. You press on, your eyes straining against the blizzard, searching for any sign of shelter. The grand stone buildings, homes of merchants and minor nobles, are dark and silent, their heavy wooden shutters latched tight. You can almost hear the chattering teeth of those inside, even through the thick walls. Medieval Parisians, you recall, weren't exactly blessed with double glazing. Many made do with oiled linen or parchment stretched over window frames, which offered about as much insulation as a wet dishcloth against a winter like this. No wonder they huddled close to their fires. You spot what looks like a less grand alley, a mere slit between two leaning buildings, and plunge into its relative shelter from the wind, though the snow still finds its way down, dusting your shoulders. The sound of the storm is marginally muffled here, replaced by the drip of melting snow from overloaded eaves and the occasional skittering of unseen creatures in the refuse piled against the walls. You try to ignore the mounting dread, the ice forming in your beard, the numbness in your fingers. That's the thing about a proper medieval winter. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a siege. Forget checking your weather app. You knew it was bad when the wolves started getting brave enough to prowl the outskirts of the city walls. Then, a glimmer. Not light exactly, but a subtle suggestion of it. A murky orange glow seeping from beneath a poorly fitted door further down the passage. With it comes a low hum of voices, too indistinct to be words but undeniably human. Hope, or perhaps just a lesser form of despair, flickers in your chest. You approach cautiously, your hand instinctively going to the hilt of the dagger tucked in your belt, a comfort more psychological than practical, given the company you're likely to find in such a place at such an hour. The establishment, if you can call it that, is little more than a hovel dug into the side of an older, crumbling structure, its roof patched with what looks suspiciously like stolen tarpaulins and hope. You push the creaking door inward, the protest of its ancient hinges loud in the sudden quiet from inside. All eyes turn to you, and what eyes they are. The room is small, cramped, and thick with the fug of unwashed bodies, cheap, sour wine, and the smoke from a sputtering fire in a crudely fashioned hearth. It's not much warmer than outside, but at least the wind isn't actively trying to flay you. Several figures are hunched around a rickety table, their faces shadowed and unreadable in the flickering light of a few tallow candles. Their clothes are as worn as yours, perhaps more so, a motley collection of patched doublets, frayed hose, and caps pulled low. These aren't the city's upstanding citizens, that much is clear. They are the flotsam and jetsam of Paris, the dispossessed, the desperate, maybe even the dangerous. You can almost smell the simmering resentment and the faint metallic tang of desperation that clings to them like cheap perfume. It's a bit like walking into a job center where everyone's been made redundant from the local cutthroat academy. A gaunt man with a scar that bisects his left eyebrow grunts, a sound that might be a greeting or a threat. Another, a hulking brute with shoulders like a bull, merely stares, his eyes flat and cold. There's a younger fellow, perhaps a student who's fallen on hard times, his face still soft but already etched with lines of worry. And then there's the one who seems to command a certain deference, not through size, but through a stillness, an intensity in his gaze that suggests a keen mind and perhaps a coiled spring readiness. Historians still argue whether these shadowy figures in Parisian criminal society were truly organized, or just loose confederations of opportunity. But looking at this lot, you suspect it was a bit of both. You nod curtly, trying to project an air of weary indifference you don't quite feel, and shuffle towards the meager fire, seeking its pitiful warmth. The conversation, if it ever truly was one, has died. The only sounds now are the crackle of the damp wood, the persistent howl of the wind outside, and the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the smoky air. You manage to find a three-legged stool that threatens to become a no-legged stool with every twitch of your weight and drag it slightly closer to the pathetic excuse for a fire. The occupants of the hovel resume their previous activity, which you now see involves a greasy, much-handled deck of cards. No one offers you a drink, which is probably a blessing in disguise given the cloudy, vinegar-like liquid sloshing in their wooden cups. Medieval wine, especially at this end of the market, wasn't exactly a prized vintage. It was often young, harsh, and prone to turning sour quickly. Sometimes they'd even add lead to sweeten it, which, as you can imagine, wasn't great for long-term health or short-term decision-making. The game appears to be some form of primero, or perhaps an ancestor of it, a popular card game of the era that involved bluffing and vying for the best combination of cards. Historians still argue whether the true origins of specific card games like these lie in Italy, Spain, or even further east, but by the mid-15th century, playing cards, often hand-painted and expensive, were definitely a fixture in European taverns, and well, places like this. These particular cards, however, look like they've been used to soak up spills, prop open windows, and possibly even stop a minor blade at some point. The kings and queens are smudged beyond recognition, their noble expressions worn down to enigmatic blobs. You're not invited to join the game, and frankly, you're relieved. Your coin purse feels conspicuously light, and your bluffing skills, honed in slightly less intimidating environments, probably wouldn't cut it here. These men play with a grim intensity, their eyes flicking from their cards to each other's faces, searching for any tell, any flicker of weakness. The stakes are probably pitifully small, a few deniers here, a handful of chipped farthings there, but you get the sense they're playing for something more than just coin. Pride, perhaps, or just the brief, intoxicating thrill of winning, a fleeting escape from the gnawing reality of their lives. The air, already thick, grows heavier with unspoken frustrations. A pewter coin is slammed onto the table with a little too much force. Someone coughs, a rasping graveyard sound that seems to linger. The bull-shouldered man, whom you mentally dub Ox, grunts whenever he loses a hand, a sound like distant thunder. The younger man, the one with the worried student face, let's call him Parchment, nervously shuffles his feet. Even the man with the scarred eyebrow, Scar, seems to radiate a sort of sullen displeasure, though he says little, nursing his drink and his cards with equal possessiveness. It's like watching a particularly depressing poker night where everyone knows the snacks have run out, and the only thing left to play for is the right not to sleep in the snow. The focus of the tension, however, seems to be a lean, wiry individual whose face you haven't quite gotten a clear look at yet. He's hunched over his cards, a dark woolen cap pulled low, obscuring much of his features. But there's an agitated energy about him, a restlessness that contrasts with Scar's brooding stillness. He mutters to himself, occasionally tapping his fingers on the table in a staccato rhythm. You notice he has long, rather delicate hands, an artist's hands, incongruous with the rough company and the rougher surroundings. Then it happens. Scar, having just lost a small pot to this wiry figure, slams his own cards face down. "That's twice you've had the ace when you needed it, Villon," he snarls, his voice a low growl. "Ah, so the wiry one has a name, Villon. It doesn't ring any immediate bells. Not that you're expecting a celebrity guest list in this charming establishment." Villon looks up slowly, and for the first time you see his face properly. It's sharp, intelligent, with eyes that are surprisingly bright and quick, despite the weariness etched around them. There's a hint of mockery, or perhaps just a profound cynicism, playing at the corners of his mouth. "And if fortune favors me, friend Thévenin," he replies, his voice surprisingly cultured, though roughened by drink or cold. "Am I to apologize for her good taste?" He even manages a slight, insolent bow, more of a twitch of the shoulders, really. Oh, this is not going to end well. It's the medieval equivalent of saying, "You mad, bro?" to a man who looks like he eats nails for breakfast. Thevenin Scar leans forward, his bulk making the flimsy table creak in protest. "Fortune or a well-placed card up your sleeve?" His hand hovers near the hilt of a decidedly unpleasant-looking knife tucked into his belt. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath from the other players, though Ox just continues to look vaguely bored, as if minor stabbings are just part of the evening's entertainment. Parchment, on the other hand, looks like he's about to be sick. It's a fascinating, if terrifying, study in human dynamics. Gambling dens in 15th century Paris weren't known for their robust dispute resolution mechanisms. There were no bouncers, no security cameras, and complaints to the management, if such a thing existed, probably involved more knives. A quirky, if morbid, tidbit. Some chronicles from the period mention bodies simply being tossed into the Seine after disagreements in such places, the river serving as an unofficial and very cold disposal system. You subtly shift your weight on the precarious stool, trying to look as uninteresting and uninvolved as humanly possible, like a badly placed piece of furniture. Villon doesn't flinch. He meets Thévenin's glare with a cool amusement that seems almost unnatural in this setting. "My dear Thévenin," he says, his voice taking on a theatrical lilt, "if I were as adept at concealing cards as you are at concealing your intellect, I'd be robbing the king's own treasury, not wasting my time in this charmingly rustic abode with fellows of your exquisite breeding." The sarcasm is laid on so thick you could spread it on toast. The temperature in the room, already frigid, seems to drop another 10 degrees. Thévenin's face, already a study in simmering resentment, darkens to a truly alarming shade of puce. You can see a vein throbbing in his temple, a tiny, angry drumbeat accompanying the wind's relentless assault outside. His hand, which had been hovering near his knife, now closes around its hilt with a grim finality. The other players at the table, sensing the shift from tense to terminal, subtly begin to edge their stools back, creating a small, almost imperceptible arena around the two antagonists. Ox lets out a low grunt that might be anticipation, or perhaps just indigestion from the questionable wine. Parchment has gone from looking sick to looking like he's seen a particularly unpleasant ghost. Villon, however, remains infuriatingly composed. He even allows himself a small, tight smile, as if goading Thévenin further were some kind of intellectual exercise. It's a dangerous game playing matador with a bull in a china shop, especially when the china shop is already half demolished and smelling faintly of despair. "A man of your talents, Thévenin," Villon continues, his voice still light, almost conversational, "shouldn't need to resort to baseless accusations. Perhaps your eyes are failing you. Or is it just that the sight of a coin not destined for your own pocket offends your delicate sensibilities? That's it, the last straw. Or, in this case, the last impeccably phrased insult." With a roar that's more animal than human, Thévenin shoves the table aside. Cards, coins, and a half-empty cup of that dreadful wine go flying. The table collides with Parchment's shins, and he yelps, scrambling further away, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. The movement is surprisingly fast for a man of Thévenin's bulk. He lunges across the small space, his knife already free, a dull glint of steel in the flickering candlelight. Villon, for all his prior languor, moves with a sudden viper-like speed. He's on his feet, his own stool skittering away, and though you don't see him draw a weapon, he seems to anticipate Thevenin's clumsy, rage-fueled thrust. He sidesteps, not with grace, but with a desperate agility, the larger man's blade swishing through the empty air where Villon had been a moment before. The whoosh of the near miss is loud in the sudden sharp silence of the room. It's a messy, ugly affair, not the elegant swordplay of romances. This is close, brutal, and driven by raw, unadulterated fury. Thevenin, overbalanced, stumbles, his momentum carrying him forward. Villon seizes the momentary advantage. You see his arm dart out. He did have a blade after all, a slender, wicked-looking poniard that had been concealed somewhere about his person. The mainstream historical fact here is that personal knives were incredibly common in the 15th century. Far from being just a weapon, they were everyday tools for eating, for mending, for work. But in a place like this, their other purpose was never far from mind. There's no dramatic clash of steel, no prolonged duel. It's over almost before it begins. A sickening, wet thud. Thevenin makes a sound, a choked gurgle, as if surprised by the sudden, brutal interruption to his rage. He staggers back, his hands clutching at his chest, a dark stain blossoming with shocking speed on his already filthy tunic. His eyes, wide with disbelief, fix on Villon, then seem to lose focus. The fight drains out of him, replaced by a slack-jawed astonishment. He sways for a moment, a grotesque parody of a drunkard, and then collapses. Not neatly, not theatrically, but heavily, like a sack of refuse, sending up a small puff of dust from the filthy floor. The knife, his own knife, clatters beside him, momentarily forgotten. A profound, absolute silence descends upon the room, broken only by Thevenin's ragged, wheezing breaths, which are already growing shallower. No one moves. No one speaks. Ox stares at the fallen man, his bovine expression unreadable. Parchment is frozen, his face a mask of horror, his eyes glued to the spreading stain. Even the candles seem to flicker less, as if holding their breath. Villon stands over his opponent, his chest heaving, the poniard still gripped in his hand, its tip now darkly wet. His earlier cynicism, his theatrical mockery, all gone. His face is pale, drawn, and his eyes have a haunted look. He stares down at Thevenin, not with triumph, but with a kind of grim resignation. He takes a shuddering breath, then another. This isn't his first such encounter, you suspect, but that doesn't make the aftermath any less stark. You, forgotten on your wobbly stool near the dying fire, feel a cold dread seep into your bones that has nothing to do with the November storm outside. The casual brutality, the suddenness of it, is shocking. You've stumbled from a miserable night into a potentially lethal one. Historians still argue whether the levels of daily violence in late medieval cities were truly as high as popular imagination suggests, or if such incidents were sensationalized in chronicles. But from where you're sitting, with a freshly dispatched card cheat bleeding out a few feet away, the statistics feel rather academic. The silence stretches, becoming unbearable. Then, Parchment makes a small, whimpering sound. Ox grunts again finally and shifts his bulk, as if rousing himself from a stupor. Villon slowly lowers his arm, wiping the blade absently on his breeches, a smear of crimson against the dark wool. The act is mundane, almost dismissive, yet utterly chilling. He glances around the room, his eyes briefly meeting yours, flat and unreadable. He seems to be calculating, his quick mind already processing the new, more dangerous situation. The card game is definitely over. The next game, it seems, is survival. The fragile bubble of inaction shatters. Villon, his face still pale but now set in grim determination, is the first to break the tableau. "Well," he says, his voice raspy, stripped of its earlier sarcastic lilt. "That escalated, quickly." A master of understatement, this Villon. He doesn't spare another glance for Thevenin, who now lies utterly still, a growing pool of darkness seeping into the dirt floor around him. The room, which was merely squalid before, now feels like a tomb. "The watch," Parchment whispers, his voice cracking, his eyes wide with terror. "They'll hear. Someone will call the watch." In 15th century Paris, the watch referred to the Guet Royal, the city's rudimentary police force. Composed of armed sergeants, they patrolled the streets at night, responsible for maintaining order, arresting criminals, and generally being a presence that characters like Villon and, by unfortunate association, now you, would prefer to avoid. They weren't exactly CSI Paris, but they were certainly capable of making life very unpleasant for anyone caught near a fresh corpse. "He's right," Ox rumbles, surprising you with his first coherent sentence of the evening. He lumbers to his feet, his gaze flicking nervously towards the door. "This place, it's no good now." "No kidding, Ox. You'd think the pre-existing decor might have clued him in. The man's a genius. Villon is already moving." He sheathes his poniard and makes a quick, almost cursory search of Thevenin's pockets, extracting a few pitiful coins. "Waste not, want not," he mutters, more to himself than to anyone else. It's a chillingly pragmatic gesture. He then turns to the rest of you, his eyes hard. "Out, all of you, now. Scatter, and try not to look like you've just seen a man dispatched over a crooked hand of cards." Easier said than done, you think, as your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. There's a sudden, desperate scramble for the door. Parchment practically throws himself at it, fumbling with the crude latch in his panic. Ox, despite his bulk, is surprisingly quick, shouldering past the terrified student. You hesitate for a split second, a horrifying vision of being left behind to explain the body flashing through your mind. That's all the motivation you need. You shove your rickety stool aside and lunge after them. The moment you burst out of the hovel and back into the narrow alleyway, the full fury of the storm hits you like a physical blow. The wind howls with renewed ferocity, snatching the breath from your lungs and stinging your exposed face with icy particles. Snow swirls in a blinding, disorienting vortex. If anything, the blizzard has intensified. It's as if the city itself is trying to obliterate any trace of what just happened, or perhaps punish those fleeing from it. You follow the shadowy figures of Villon, Ox, and Parchment as they plunge into the deeper snow of the alley. There's no plan, no coordination, just a shared instinct to get as far away from the scene of the crime as possible. The immediate pressing danger of the watch has eclipsed, for a moment, the slower, more insidious threat of the cold. Parchment is already struggling, his thin cloak offering little protection. He stumbles, recovers, then stumbles again, letting out a cry of despair as he drops something, perhaps his meager purse, or maybe just his last shred of composure. Ox, a lumbering silhouette, simply plows ahead, creating a surprisingly effective, if temporary, path through the deeper drifts. Villon, lithe and quick, seems to navigate the treacherous footing with an almost unnatural ease, like a creature born of the storm itself. The narrow alley opens onto a slightly wider but equally uninviting street. The wind here is a savage beast, roaring between the tall, lightless buildings, whipping snow into stinging clouds. You can barely see a few feet in front of you. The mainstream historical fact of unlit medieval streets at night cannot be overstated. Barring the occasional lantern carried by a wealthy individual or a member of the watch, city streets after dark were pitch black, making navigation treacherous and providing ample cover for nefarious deeds. Like, for instance, fleeing a murder. Villon gestures vaguely to the left. "Split up!" he shouts over the din of the storm, his voice already sounding distant. "Less chance that way!" Then he's gone, swallowed by the swirling white. Ox, without a word, veers off to the right, disappearing almost as quickly. Parchment, after a moment of panicked indecision, whimpers and half runs, half stumbles straight ahead, vanishing into the maelstrom. And just like that, you are alone again. Utterly, terrifyingly alone in a city that feels vast, hostile, and now acutely dangerous. The fleeting camaraderie of the hovel, grim as it was, is gone. The brief violent flare of shared experience has dispersed as quickly as smoke in the wind. You're back to square one, freezing, lost, and with the added bonus of now being peripherally involved in a rather serious felony. Historians still argue whether concepts of joint enterprise or accessory after the fact were clearly defined in 15th century Parisian law, but you suspect the Guet Royale wouldn't be too interested in the legal niceties if they found you. The sounds of the city are muffled and distorted by the snow. The distant clang of a loose shutter, the creak of a straining tavern sign, and overriding it all, the omnipresent shriek of the wind. Chaos echoes not just behind you, in the memory of that squalid room, but all around you in the storm's furious embrace. You pull your inadequate cloak tighter, the snow already crusting on your shoulders and hair, and pick a direction, any direction. Plunging into the teeth of the blizzard, the image of Thavanen's slack, surprised face seared into your mind. You almost wish you had one of those ancient Egyptian crocodile dung sunscreens. Perhaps it would offer some magical protection against frozen justice too. Probably not. The relative shelter of the narrow street is quickly left behind as you blunder into a wider thoroughfare, or perhaps a small square. It's hard to tell. The swirling snow erases all landmarks, transforming the familiar architecture of Paris into a ghostly, alien landscape. Buildings loom like pale specters, their windows dark, unwelcoming eyes. The wind, unimpeded here, whips at you from all directions, trying to pry the very clothes from your back. Your breath crystallizes instantly, a fleeting white plume snatched away by the gale. Each step is a struggle. Snowdrifts, sculpted by the wind into treacherous, unseen hollows and ridges, lie in wait to trip you. Your boots, already soaked through, feel like blocks of ice, and your toes are a distant, aching memory. The cold is no longer just a discomfort. It's an aggressive, insidious enemy, seeping into your core, numbing your extremities and dulling your thoughts. You remember hearing tales of people simply sitting down in the snow, overcome by a deceptive sense of warmth as hypothermia took hold. You shake your head fiercely, trying to dispel the dangerous lethargy that's beginning to creep in. This isn't like that time you got a bit chilly waiting for the night bus after a particularly dire office Christmas party. This is the real, life-threatening deal. You try to keep to the sides of the streets, hoping for some meager protection from the building walls, but the snow has piled high against them, forcing you back out into the open. You slip, catching yourself painfully on one knee, the impact sending a fresh jolt of cold and despair through your system. For a moment, you just stay there, gasping, the snow falling softly on your bowed head. The temptation to just stop is immense. What direction did Villon go? Or ox? Or even poor, blubbering parchment? It's impossible to say. You could have passed them a street away and never known. The blizzard has atomized your little group of fugitives, each now a solitary particle battling the storm. Your earlier fear of the watch is now competing with a more immediate fear, freezing to death, alone and unnoticed, in some snow-choked Parisian alley. A rather ignominious end, even by medieval standards. The sounds of the city are increasingly eerie. The wind whistles through unseen cracks in the stonework, creating mournful, flute-like notes. A loose shutter bangs repeatedly, a frantic, irregular drumbeat. Is that a dog howling in the distance or just another trick of the wind? Your senses, sharpened by fear, play tricks on you. Every gust of wind seems to carry a whisper. Every shadow seems to conceal a threat. You press on, driven by a primal instinct for survival. You try to orient yourself, to recognize a church spire, a familiar turn, but the world is a white blur. You think you might be heading roughly south towards the Seine, but it's pure guesswork. And what then? The river would be a churning, ice-choked maelstrom tonight. No solace there. Occasionally, a more sheltered corner offers a moment's respite from the wind's direct assault. You lean against a cold stone wall, gasping for breath, trying to chafe some feeling back into your frozen fingers. The irony isn't lost on you. You fled the fug and danger of that squalid den only to find yourself in a far larger, colder, and equally indifferent kind of peril. At least in the hovel there was a fire, however pathetic. Out here, there is only the relentless, biting cold. You recall a fringe tidbit you once read. Some medieval texts describe people using animal skins packed with heated stones as primitive hot water bottles, a desperate measure against the cold. Right now, the idea of a warm stone, let alone a warm bed, seems like an unimaginable luxury. Even the questionable company of Villon and his associates feels preferable to this solitary, freezing torment. A new fear begins to prickle at the edges of your numbed consciousness, getting truly, hopelessly lost. Paris, even in 1456, was a labyrinth of winding streets and unnamed alleys. Without familiar landmarks, obscured as they are by the blizzard, you could wander in circles for hours, burning precious energy until you finally succumbed. Historians still argue whether the average Parisian in this era had a strong mental map of their city, or if their knowledge was largely confined to their own quarter and the main thoroughfares. You suspect that tonight, even a lifelong resident would be struggling. Your eyes strain through the driving snow, searching for any sign of light, any hint of shelter. But all is darkness, a seemingly endless expanse of white and gray. The brief, violent drama of Thevenin's death feels a lifetime away, though it was likely less than an hour ago. Now, the struggle is simpler, more elemental, you against the storm. And the storm, you realize with a chilling certainty, is winning. The cold isn't just a physical sensation anymore. It's a weight, a presence pressing down on you, sapping your will. You remember Villon's lean, hawkish face. Did he make it? Did any of them? Or are they too, like you, swallowed by the icy maw of the Parisian night? The thought brings no comfort, only a deeper sense of shared and yet utterly separate doom. You stumble onward, one frozen foot in front of the other, driven by a diminishing spark of hope, or perhaps just stubbornness. The silence, apart from the wind's endless monologue, is unnerving. Where is everyone? Surely, even in a storm like this, there should be some sign of life, a belated traveler, a member of the watch, even a stray dog. But the city seems to have been utterly abandoned, surrendered to the elements. It's like everyone else got the memo about the apocalyptic blizzard and decided to stay in, probably huddled around a roaring fire with mulled wine, while you're out here playing solo Arctic explorer. Then, through a momentary thinning of the swirling snow, you glimpse a darker, more solid mass ahead, a building larger than the rest, its silhouette hinting at ecclesiastical architecture. A church. A surge of adrenaline, cold as it is, courses through you. Churches, in the medieval mind, were not just places of worship. They were sanctuaries, often offering shelter to the truly desperate, the traveler caught out after dark, or even sometimes, those fleeing from less spiritual dangers. This particular practice, the rite of sanctuary, varied greatly by location and time period, but the general idea that a church was a relatively safe haven persisted. With renewed, albeit faltering energy, you push towards it. The snow here seems deeper, less trodden, as if few have approached this sacred precinct tonight. You reach a high stone wall, part of the church's outer boundary, and begin to follow it, searching for a gate, an entrance, any way in. Your gloved hands, clumsy with cold, run along the frigid, unyielding stone. Finally, you see it. A heavy, nail-studded wooden door, set deep within an arched stone gateway. It looks ancient, implacable, as if it hasn't been opened in centuries. But it's your only hope. You pound on the thick oak with what little strength remains in your fists. The sound is distressingly muffled, absorbed by the heavy wood and the blanket of snow. "Hello!" you shout, your voice hoarse and weak against the wind. "Is anyone there? Shelter for the love of God?" Silence. Only the wind answers, whipping snow into your face as if mocking your plea. You try again, hammering with the side of your fist, desperation lending a frantic energy to your blows. "Please! Open up! I'm freezing out here!" You can almost imagine the scene inside. A sleepy sacristan, roused by the faint noise, debating whether to investigate or just pull his warm blankets higher. In the grand scheme of 15th century church administration, dealing with a frozen vagrant in the middle of a blizzard was probably low on the priority list. Historians still argue whether churches were genuinely more charitable institutions in practice, or if their reputation for sanctuary was often more theoretical than readily available to the common unfortunate. After what feels like an eternity, with no response, you sag against the door, defeated. It's locked, bolted, barred from the inside. No sanctuary here. The church, it seems, is also taking a snow day. A wave of despair washes over you, so potent it almost makes you buckle. You push yourself away from the mocking door and continue your trudge, now more aimless than before. If God's house won't take you in, what chance do you have with mere mortals? You try a few other doors as you stumble through what seem to be residential streets. Some are the grand entrances to imposing stone houses, homes of merchants or minor nobility. Your knocks there are even more futile. You can practically hear the derisive laughter from within, or perhaps just the clink of wine goblets as the inhabitants toast their good fortune at being warm and secure, far from the likes of you. It's like ringing the doorbell of a millionaire's mansion, asking if you can crash on their sofa because your Uber to the hovel got cancelled. The social divide in medieval Paris was a chasm, and you, currently, are very much on the wrong side of it. Other doors are humbler, leading to more modest dwellings, perhaps the homes of artisans or shopkeepers. But these too are sealed tight, in a city gripped by fear of crime. And let's be honest, your appearance right now isn't exactly reassuring. A knock in the dead of night during a raging blizzard is more likely to be met with a shouted threat, or perhaps the contents of a chamber pot from an upper window, than a welcoming hand. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit that Gardyloo, the warning cry before waste was chucked from windows, was a real thing in medieval cities, though perhaps less charming when you're the potential target. Each locked door, each silent shuttered window, is another small death to your hopes. The cold is intensifying its assault, and the brief surge of adrenaline from spotting the church has faded, leaving you even more exhausted. Your vision is starting to blur at the edges. The snow, which had been your adversary, now seems almost seductive, promising a soft, albeit final embrace. You fight against the growing numbness, the treacherous desire to simply lie down and let it all end. This relentless rejection, this feeling of being utterly shut out by the entire city, is almost worse than the physical cold. It's a profound existential loneliness. The world is full of warmth, of light, of companionship, but it's all behind locked doors, and you don't have the key. You wander on, a ghost in a city of ghosts, the blizzard your only constant companion. The streets, if they can even be called that, more like snow-filled trenches between menacing dark shapes, twist and turn with no discernible logic. You're pretty sure you've passed that leaning house with the grotesquely carved gargoyle twice now? Or perhaps all leaning houses with grotesquely carved gargoyles just look the same when you're half frozen and hallucinating. It's a good time to remember that street signs were not a common feature in medieval Paris. Navigation was often by landmark, a particular fountain, a famous shop sign, or, disconcertingly, the gibbet. And then, as if summoned by that grim thought, it looms out of the swirling chaos of white. Montfaucon, or at least you assume it must be. Even obscured by the storm, the silhouette is unmistakable. A monstrous, tiered stone structure, skeletal and stark against the raging sky. This isn't just any gallows. Montfaucon was the main gibbet of the kings of France, a truly horrifying public spectacle located just outside the city walls to the northeast. It was a massive, three-sided affair, capable of displaying dozens of bodies simultaneously, left to rot as a grim warning to others. Its presence was a stark and constant reminder of the brutal justice of the era. Even from a distance, muffled by the snow and wind, the sight sends a fresh spear of icy dread through you, colder than any physical chill. The faint, sickeningly sweet smell of decay, or perhaps just your overactive imagination, seems to cling to the air around it. You can almost picture the bodies, swaying gently in the storm's embrace, their rags stiff with ice, their empty eye sockets staring out into the white nothingness. It's a bit like stumbling across a particularly poorly reviewed open-air art installation, except the exhibits are real and definitely not consenting. The image of Thevenin's sprawled form back in that squalid hovel flashes into your mind. Would this be his ultimate destination, if his body were found? Or worse, if you were caught and somehow implicated more deeply than mere terrified bystander? The law in 1456 wasn't exactly renowned for its nuanced understanding of wrong place, wrong time. The specter of Montfaucon, with its dangling, decaying tenants, serves as a potent motivator. You need to get away, not just from the cold, but from the long, unforgiving arm of royal justice. You turn sharply, veering away from the monstrous outline, seeking to put as much distance as possible between yourself and that grim monument to medieval law enforcement. The terror it inspires lends a frantic, if clumsy, energy to your movements. You slip and slide, your breath rasping in your throat, your eyes darting wildly, half expecting to see the skeletal figures detaching themselves from their ropes and coming after you. As you stumble blindly through another snow-choked alley, trying to erase the image of Montfaucon from your retinas, a different image surfaces, unbidden, from the depths of your memory. It's a strange counterpoint to the horror you've just witnessed, a flickering warm light, not from a candle or a hearth, but from within. You see a dimly lit room, much kinder than the one you recently fled. There's a soft voice, a woman's voice, perhaps your mother's, or a kindly aunt, or a figure from a story told long ago. She's humming a lullaby, a simple, soothing melody. You can almost feel the scratch of a woolen blanket, the comforting weight of a hand on your forehead. The memory is so vivid, so incongruous with your current frozen misery, that it almost makes you weep. It's a stark reminder of warmth, of safety, of a time when the world didn't feel like a conspiracy of ice and locked doors. Where did that come from? You can't quite place the specific details, the face, the tune, but the feeling it evokes is powerful, a deep, primal ache for comfort and care that contrasts so painfully with the brutal reality of your situation. Historians still argue whether deeply personal, emotional memories were as consciously cultivated in the medieval period as they are in our more introspective age, but the human heart surely has always yearned for solace. This brief, unexpected whisper from a gentler past does something strange. It doesn't diminish your fear, but it adds a layer of profound sorrow, a sense of loss for a warmth you can't quite grasp. It also perhaps fuels a tiny ember-like resurgence of your will to survive. That memory, that phantom comfort, is something worth fighting for, something to try and find again, even if it only exists in the abstract realm of not freezing to death in a Parisian snowdrift. The gallows fades into the swirling snow behind you, though its chilling impression lingers. The fleeting vision of warmth and a mother's care recedes, leaving you once again with the biting wind, the numbing cold, and the endless, unforgiving night. But perhaps that momentary connection to a kinder past has stoked the fires just a little, enough to keep you moving, enough to keep you searching, even as the storm rages on and the specter of a gruesome death hangs heavy in the frigid air. You even spare a thought for that crocodile dung sunscreen. You remember it was supposed to whiten the skin too. Perhaps if you'd used some, you'd look more like a delicate noble and less like a half-frozen criminal, and people would be more inclined to open their doors. A long shot, admittedly. The brief, almost hallucinatory memory of warmth fades, and the brutal reality of the cold reasserts itself with a vengeance. It's no longer just your hands and feet that are numb. A deeper, more pervasive chill has settled into your bones, making your muscles ache and your joints stiffen. Each breath is a painful intake of icy air that seems to sear your lungs. You find yourself shivering uncontrollably, great racking shudders that do little to generate heat, but expend precious energy. Your thoughts, too, are becoming sluggish, clouded by the encroaching hypothermia. Simple decisions, like whether to turn left or right at the next snow-choked intersection, feel monumental. You try to recall basic survival knowledge. Keep moving. Stay out of the wind if possible. Don't eat snow. It lowers your core temperature. A piece of advice that feels particularly cruel when you're surrounded by an endless supply of frozen water and your throat is parchment dry. The mainstream historical fact is that access to clean drinking water in medieval cities was a constant challenge, often sourced from polluted rivers or communal wells of dubious quality. Freezing to death with thirst seems a particularly bitter irony. A wave of profound bitterness washes over you. Why you? Why this night? Why this relentless, punishing storm? You think of the people snug in their beds, warm under layers of furs and thick woolen blankets, merchants with their coffers full, nobles in their fortified hotels, even humble artisans with their families huddled around a crackling hearth. What had you done to deserve this solitary, frozen torment? It's easy in such extremity to feel singled out by a malevolent fate. You mentally curse the city, its indifferent inhabitants, the very sky that unleashes this icy fury. You even curse Villon, whose quick temper and even quicker blade initiated this desperate flight. Though, if you're honest, you were freezing and miserable long before Thévenin decided to accuse Villon of cheating at cards. This is just misery with an added frisson of mortal peril, like a terrible meal served with a side of food poisoning. The injustice of it all gnaws at you. The rich, you imagine, have roaring fires, expensive imported wines, and servants to fetch them another log, another spiced drink. They probably consider a night like this bracing or atmospheric from the safety of their insulated chambers. Perhaps they even write poetry about the stark beauty of the winter landscape, a beauty that feels considerably less poetic when it's actively trying to kill you. You, on the other hand, possess only a threadbare cloak and the rapidly fading heat of your own metabolism. The social stratification of 15th century Paris was stark, and tonight you feel every inch of the chasm separating the haves from the have-nots. You start to fantasize about warmth with an almost painful intensity. A crackling fire, its heat radiating onto your skin, chasing away the chill. A bowl of hot soup, thick and savory, warming you from the inside out. Even the smoky, crowded squalor of that hovel before the killing seems almost appealing in retrospect. At least it was out of the wind. At least there were other living, breathing, if thoroughly disreputable, human beings. The cold, it seems, breeds a particular kind of desperate, angry philosophy. What use are laws, morals, the finely spun arguments of scholars when faced with the elemental reality of freezing to death? All the societal niceties, the distinctions of rank and wealth, seem to strip away, leaving only the raw animal need for survival. Historians still argue whether extreme hardship genuinely acts as an equalizer or simply exposes the pre-existing inequalities more starkly. From your current vantage point, leaning against a snow-crusted wall, teeth chattering so hard you think they might shatter, the latter seems more accurate. The rich are still warm and you are still freezing. Equality remains an abstract concept. You try to focus, to push past the numbing despair and the unproductive anger. Anger might keep you warm for a few seconds, but it won't find you shelter. You need to think, to observe, to find some way out of this icy trap. Your eyes, gritty and sore from the wind and the strain of peering through the snow, scan the unyielding facades of the buildings. All dark, all silent. It occurs to you that your frantic wanderings might have taken you into a less populated part of the city, or perhaps an area of warehouses and workshops, deserted at night. Or maybe the storm is simply so severe that everyone, regardless of their usual nocturnal habits, has barricaded themselves indoors. A quirky tidbit about medieval cities is their nocturnal transformation. Bustling daytime centers often became eerily quiet and somewhat dangerous after curfew, which was a real thing, often signaled by a bell. You are far, far past curfew. The sheer physical misery is almost overwhelming. Your fingers are so numb you can barely feel them inside your sodden gloves. Your face feels like a frozen mask. You stumble more frequently now, your coordination failing. The shivering fits come and go, each one leaving you more exhausted. How much longer can you keep this up? The question hangs in the icy air, a silent, terrifying interrogation. The memory of Montfaucon, while still horrifying, is starting to feel less immediate than the prospect of simply collapsing into a snowdrift and never getting up again. It's a race, you realize, between freezing and finding help. And the finish line for freezing seems to be getting alarmingly close. Just as the insidious whispers of surrender are growing louder in your frozen mind, just as you're contemplating the dubious comfort of a snowdrift pillow, you see it. A light. Not a will-o'-the-wisp, not a figment of your hypothermic imagination, but a genuine man-made glow, faint and distant, yet undeniably there. It's high up, in what appears to be a substantial, multi-storied building, a single illuminated window in a vast expanse of darkness. Hope, that tenacious, often illogical human emotion, flares anew, a tiny spark in the icy furnace of your despair. It's astonishing how a single point of light can so drastically alter your perception of an utterly hopeless situation. Suddenly, the city doesn't feel quite so abandoned, the storm not quite so absolute in its dominion. It's like finding the one open stall in an otherwise deserted late-night service station, promising lukewarm coffee and a questionable pastry sheer bliss in the circumstances. The building is large, imposing, even in the obscuring snow. It has the solid, unyielding look of a place belonging to someone of importance, perhaps a wealthy burgher, a church dignitary, or even a minor nobleman. The sort of place whose doors you were so recently and fruitlessly hammering upon. But this light is different. It's not the general glow of a well-lit manor, but a solitary beacon, suggesting someone is awake, active, perhaps a scholar burning the midnight oil, or someone too restless to sleep. The distance is deceptive in the swirling snow. What looks like a mere 100 yards could be twice that, each step a monumental effort over treacherous, snow-covered ground. But the light draws you onward, a moth to a distant, uncertain flame. You fix your gaze on it, using it as a point of navigation, a talisman against the encroaching despair. As you draw closer, struggling through drifts that sometimes reach your thighs, the features of the building become slightly clearer. It's old, very old, with thick stone walls, narrow, unglazed windows, apart from the lit one, which seems to have some sort of covering, perhaps oiled parchment or even glass, a luxury, and a steeply pitched roof already heavy with accumulated snow. It has an air of somber dignity, of age and quiet authority. There are no cheerful lights spilling from lower windows, no sounds of revelry, just that single, enigmatic illumination high above. You wonder who could be awake in such a place, at such an hour, in such a storm. A scholar, as you first guessed? Medieval scholars were notorious for their nocturnal studies, often toiling by candlelight over precious manuscripts. The University of Paris, the Sorbonne, was a major intellectual center, and its influence permeated the city. Perhaps this is the residence of some learned master, absorbed in his texts. Or maybe it's an insomniac lord, troubled by gout or political anxieties. Or a less appealing thought, perhaps it's a very diligent servant, stoking a fire for an early rising master. The possibilities, none of them particularly promising for a frozen wretch like yourself, flicker through your mind. Reaching the wall of the house, you pause, breathless, leaning against the cold stone for support. The wind still howls, but here, in the lee of the massive structure, it's slightly less brutal. You look up at the lit window. It's at least 2 stories above you, maybe 3. Too high to call out to with any hope of being heard over the storm, especially with your weakened voice. You begin to circle the base of the house, your numb hands trailing along the rough-hewn stone, searching for an entrance. The building is extensive, seemingly occupying a significant plot of land. You pass several sturdy iron-banded doors, all looking resolutely shut and probably locked from within with heavy bars. These aren't the flimsy hovel doors of your earlier acquaintance. These are built to withstand sieges, or at least very determined unwanted guests. Your heart sinks a little. Why would this place be any different from the others that have rejected you? Then, rounding a corner, you find it. A more modest entryway, tucked away almost shyly, as if it's a tradesman's entrance or a side door not meant for formal visitors. It's still a heavy oak door, but it lacks the imposing grandeur of the others. And crucially, it's closer to the ground, more accessible. There's no light spilling from around its edges, no sound from within, but it's a door. And a door, by definition, is meant to be opened. Historians still argue whether distinct front and back door cultures were as rigidly defined in medieval domestic architecture as in later periods. But for practical purposes, some entrances were clearly more public than others. This one feels less public, perhaps less guarded. This is it, your last chance. If this door remains closed to you, then the snowdrift beckons with an almost irresistible allure. You take a deep, ragged breath, trying to summon the dregs of your courage and resolve. You've faced locked doors, seen a man killed, outrun, you hope, the watch, and stared into the abyss of Montfaucon. Surely you can face one more potential rejection. It's like the final round of a particularly grueling quiz show where the prize is not dying. The adrenaline, for what it's worth when you're mostly frozen solid, is definitely kicking in. Summoning every last reserve of your rapidly depleting strength and resolve, you raise a trembling, half-frozen fist and knock on the heavy oak door. The sound is solid, echoing slightly in the small alcove, a definite improvement on the muffled thuds against the church gate. It's not a timid tap, but a series of firm, deliberate raps, the knock of someone who has very little left to lose and is past caring about propriety. You almost expect it to be ignored, like all the others. You brace yourself for the familiar silence, the soul-crushing confirmation that this, too, is a dead end. You wait. The wind howls a mournful counterpoint to the frantic thumping of your own heart. Seconds stretch into an eternity. Your hope, so recently rekindled by the sight of the distant light, begins to falter, to gutter like a dying flame. Perhaps no one heard. Perhaps they're deliberately ignoring the summons, assuming it's just the storm playing tricks, or some drunken reveler who has lost his way. You can't blame them. You probably wouldn't open your door either, if you were snug inside. Especially not if you thought the person knocking looked like a half-drowned snow rat who'd recently been in a brawl, which, to be fair, is probably a pretty accurate description of your current state. Just as you're about to turn away, to sag back into the snowy oblivion, you hear it. A sound from within. Not speech, but movement. The distinct, unmistakable scrape of a heavy bar being drawn back. Then another. Your breath catches in your throat. Someone is opening the door. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing remains to be seen, but it is at least a thing. A change from the unrelenting negativity of the night. The door groans open, not wide, but just a crack, revealing a sliver of pitch blackness beyond. For a moment, nothing. Then, a quavering, elderly voice cuts through the wind's shriek. "Who is it? What do you want at this hour in this tempest?" The voice is reedy, thin, like dry leaves skittering across parchment, but it holds a surprising note of authority. "Mercy!" you cry, your own voice hoarse, barely a croak. "Shelter! For the love of God, I am perishing in the cold!" You try to put as much desperation and pathos into your plea as possible, hoping to appeal to some shred of human compassion. You're not above a bit of theatrical begging at this point. Your pride froze solid about 3 streets back. There's another pause. You can almost feel the unseen eyes scrutinizing you through that narrow gap. You imagine an old servant, wary and suspicious, peering out. Perhaps he's alone and frightened. Perhaps he's under strict orders not to open the door to anyone after dark. The mainstream historical fact is that households, especially those of the wealthy, often had strict rules about securing the premises at night due to the very real dangers of burglary and home invasion. This wasn't the sort of neighborhood where you left your keys under the doormat. "Go away," the voice says, a little stronger now, tinged with fear. "There is no shelter here for vagrants. Be off, or I shall call for my men." Men, you think, your heart sinking. What men? Are you going to rouse a couple of equally ancient retainers who are probably deafer than you are? But you don't say it. Instead, you redouble your plea. "I am no vagrant, good sir, but a traveler caught unawares by this devilish storm. I have money. I will pay for a corner by the fire, a crust of bread. I am freezing to death out here." The mention of money is a gamble. It might spark avarice, or it might confirm their suspicion that you're up to no good. But you're desperate. The door creaks open a fraction more. You can now see a flickering light from somewhere deeper within the house, casting long, dancing shadows. A figure begins to resolve itself in the narrow opening. An old man, bent with age, holding a trembling tallow candle aloft. He's wrapped in a heavy dark robe, and his face, illuminated from below by the candle flame, is a roadmap of wrinkles. His eyes sunken but surprisingly sharp and intelligent. He looks like a particularly ancient and slightly disapproving owl. He peers at you, his gaze intense, unwavering. You try to look as pathetic and non-threatening as possible, which isn't hard, given your current state. You probably look like something the cat dragged in, then thought better of, and then dragged back out into the snow. Historians still argue whether age in medieval society automatically conferred respect, or if it often led to vulnerability and marginalization. This old fellow seems to embody a bit of both, frail in body, yet possessed of a steely will. "Money, you say?" he queries, his voice still suspicious, but perhaps a shade less hostile. "You do not look like a man who has seen a coin in many a day." Ouch. Harsh, but fair. "The storm has been unkind to my appearance, sir," you manage, trying to inject a note of rueful dignity. "But I speak true. A little charity, and you will be rewarded if not in this life, then in the next. And perhaps a little in this one, too, if you take my meaning. You're practically offering to write him a glowing review on Medieval TripAdvisor if he just lets you in. The old man considers this, his head tilted. The candle flame wavers, threatening to extinguish, much like your hope. The wind continues its assault, a constant reminder of the fate that awaits you if this door closes. He seems to be weighing the risk, the potential reward, the dictates of Christian charity versus the very real possibility that you're a cutthroat or a thief. It's a heavy decision to place on such ancient shoulders in the dead of a storm-racked night. You hold your breath, waiting for his verdict. The fate of your frozen toes, and indeed the rest of you, hangs in the balance. The old man continues his unnervingly thorough scrutiny, his sharp eyes missing nothing of your wretched state. The ice in your beard, the sodden, clinging rags that were once clothes, the tremor in your limbs that is only partly due to the cold. Fear has its own shivers. You can almost hear the cogs whirring in his ancient mind as he calculates the odds. Letting you in could mean anything from a simple act of charity to inviting a fox into the henhouse, or in your case, a half-frozen wolf with suspiciously empty pockets and a wild look in his eyes. "You are alone?" he finally asks, his voice still betraying a deep-seated suspicion. He peers past you into the swirling snow, as if expecting a gang of your equally disreputable accomplices to suddenly materialize from the blizzard. "Utterly alone, good master," you assure him, trying to sound as forlorn and harmless as possible. "Separated from my companions by this tempest, lost and perishing." You make a conscious effort to keep your teeth from chattering too loudly, lest it undermine your attempt at coherent speech. He considers this for another long moment, the candlelight flickering across his deeply lined face, making the shadows dance in his eye sockets. It gives him a slightly skull-like appearance, which isn't particularly comforting. You are acutely aware of the warmth, however faint, that seeps from the narrow opening, a tantalizing promise just beyond your reach. It smells faintly of wood smoke and old books, a much more inviting aroma than the metallic tang of fear and cheap wine you experienced earlier in the night. "And your business in Paris?" he presses, his gaze unwavering. "What brings a traveler such as yourself out on a night when even the wolves seek shelter?" Ah, the awkward questions. You can hardly tell him you were enjoying a quiet game of cards that unexpectedly turned into a homicide investigation, leading to an unscheduled sprint through a blizzard. I am a scholar, sir," you improvise, hoping the term carries some weight, some vague respectability. Villon, with his surprisingly cultured voice, might have pulled it off. You, currently resembling a frozen scarecrow, are less convincing. "Seeking knowledge, at the university. But my lodgings, I mistook the hour, the weather." You let your voice trail off, hoping he'll fill in the blanks with a more charitable interpretation than feckless idiot caught out by his own poor planning. His eyes narrow slightly. "A scholar, you say?" He looks you up and down again, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression, perhaps disbelief, perhaps a dawning pity, or maybe just the professional skepticism of someone who has heard many a tall tale at his doorstep. "You have the look of a man more acquainted with taverns than libraries, if you'll pardon my directness." Double ouch. This old guy doesn't pull his punches. He's like a medieval Simon Cowell assessing your sob story. "The storm has been a harsh tutor, sir," you reply, attempting a wry, scholarly tone that probably just sounds desperate. "It has stripped away much of the superficial." You gesture vaguely at your ragged attire. "But the mind remains, eager for intellectual succor, and at this present moment, a warm fire." You pour every ounce of sincerity you can muster into your gaze. You need him to believe you, or at least to pity you enough to take a chance. The mainstream historical fact is that charity was considered a Christian virtue, and providing for the needy, including offering shelter to travelers, was encouraged. However, the line between deserving poor and shiftless vagrant was often blurry and subjectively drawn. He lets out a sigh, a dry, rustling sound. "A scholar," he repeats, almost to himself as if testing the word. "What manner of scholar are you that you wander the streets in such a state on such a night?" A student of human nature, perhaps?" you offer, grasping at straws. "Observing its resilience in the face of adversity?" It sounds pompous and ridiculous even to your own ears, but you're running out of options. You feel like you're auditioning for the role of frozen wretch number 1 and flubbing your lines. The old man's lips twitch, a movement that might be the precursor to a smile or possibly a grimace of distaste. It's hard to tell in the flickering light. "Human nature is indeed a wide field of study," he murmurs. "And you, it would seem, are currently providing a rather vivid practical demonstration of its more pathetic aspects." Okay, so definitely not a smile. Despite the biting remarks, you sense a subtle shift in his demeanor. The initial outright hostility seems to have softened, replaced by a kind of weary resignation, or perhaps a flicker of academic curiosity. Historians still argue whether genuine intellectual curiosity could sometimes override social prejudice in encounters between different strata of medieval society. Maybe your desperate, implausible claim to scholarship has, against all odds, piqued his interest. "Very well," he says at last, the words sending a jolt of unbelievable relief through your frozen body. "It is not Christian to leave even a dog out in such a storm, let alone a self-proclaimed scholar, however unconvincing his credentials." He pulls the door open a little wider, though still not fully. "Enter quickly, before you bring the entire blizzard in with you. And mark my words, scholar, any trouble, any hint of falsehood, and you will find yourself back in the snow faster than you can say hypothermia." The warning is stark, but the implied promise of shelter, of warmth, is all you hear. With a surge of profound, almost delirious gratitude, you stumble across the threshold, out of the wind's screaming fury, and into the relative stillness of the house. The old man quickly closes the heavy oak door behind you, the sound of the bars sliding back into place, echoing with a satisfying finality. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, you are not being actively assaulted by the elements. The sudden cessation of the wind's roar leaves your ears ringing in the sudden, thick silence of the interior. You find yourself in a narrow, stone-flagged passageway. It's dark, lit only by the single tallow candle the old man carries, its flame casting huge, wavering shadows that dance along the cold stone walls like agitated spirits. The air here is still frigid, but it lacks the biting, penetrative edge of the storm outside. It's the difference between being in a freezer and being in a very cold fridge. An improvement, undeniably. Your host, for you suppose that is what he is now, however reluctantly, turns and shuffles slowly down the passage, the candle held high. "Follow me," he commands, his reedy voice echoing slightly. "And try not to drip too much. The floors were only swept last week." A touch of domestic fussiness from your ancient rescuer. You almost want to laugh, a hysterical bubble of relief, but you manage to stifle it. You are, after all, on probation. You obey, your legs stiff and clumsy, your sodden boots squelching softly on the stone flags. You're leaving a trail of melting snow and grime, a decidedly unscholarly mess. You can feel his disapproving gaze, even without him looking back. It's like being a muddy dog reluctantly allowed into a pristine show home. The passage opens into a much larger space, a cavernous hall that seems to be the heart of the house. The ceilings are high, lost in the gloom above the reach of the candlelight. Tapestries, dark and faded, hang on the stone walls, their woven scenes too obscure to decipher in the dim light, though you can make out the occasional heraldic beast and somber-looking saint. A few pieces of heavy, dark wooden furniture, a long refectory table, some high-backed chairs, a massive chest loom like shadowy monoliths. It's clearly the home of someone of considerable means, though it has an air of faded grandeur, of a prosperity that belongs to a bygone era. There's a distinct lack of the cheerful clutter and warmth you might associate with a lived-in home. It feels more like a museum or a mausoleum. At the far end of the hall, a large stone fireplace dominates the wall. And wonder of wonders, a fire is actually burning within its deep recess. Not a roaring inferno, but a respectable collection of logs glowing redly, emitting a definite if not overwhelming wave of warmth. It's the most beautiful sight you've seen all night, possibly in your entire life. The old man gestures towards it with a sweep of his candle-bearing hand. "There, warm yourself, but do not presume too much upon my hospitality. This is a temporary reprieve, not an invitation to take up a residence." He says it sternly, but there's perhaps a fraction less ice in his tone than before. Or maybe you're just projecting your own desperate need for kindness onto him. You practically fall towards the hearth, collapsing onto a low wooden bench set before it. The heat, tentative at first, then more insistent, begins to seep into your frozen limbs. It's an almost painful sensation as the feeling returns to your numb extremities, a prickling, tingling ache, but it's an ache you welcome with all your heart. You hold out your hands to the flames, watching as the ice crystals on your gloves begin to melt and drip. The relief is so profound it's almost dizzying. Your host places the candle on a nearby table, its small flame doing little to dispel the overall gloom of the vast hall, but adding to the localized glow of the fire. He watches you for a moment, his expression still unreadable, a mixture of suspicion, pity, and perhaps a kind of detached curiosity. It's as if he's observing a rare and rather distressed specimen that has unexpectedly washed up on his doorstep. Historians still argue whether acts of individual charity in the medieval period were primarily motivated by religious duty, social expectation, or genuine empathy. With this old gentleman, it feels like a reluctant cocktail of all three. "You are fortunate, scholar," he says, breaking the silence. "Few would have opened their door on such a night to such a sight as you present." "I know, sir," you manage, your voice still raspy, "and I am profoundly grateful. You have quite literally saved my life." You try to inject a note of sincere humility, hoping it lands better than your earlier attempts at scholarly bravado. You are in his debt and his power entirely. This precarious warmth, this uneasy shelter, depends entirely on his continued and very grudging goodwill. The exchange is simple: the fury of the storm outside versus the watchful, reserved atmosphere within. It's not exactly a cozy bed and breakfast, more like a temporary stay in a well-appointed, slightly intimidating cave hosted by its resident hermit. But it's infinitely preferable to the alternative. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen you were fantasizing about earlier? You'd trade a lifetime supply for another log on this fire right now. The old man, seemingly satisfied that you are not about to expire immediately on his hearthrug or suddenly brandish a weapon, shuffles over to a large carved sideboard. He fumbles for a moment in the gloom, then produces a dusty earthenware jug and 2 pewter cups. The simple actions seem to take a considerable effort, his movements stiff and deliberate with age. You watch him, still basking in the glorious, life-giving heat of the fire, the prickling sensation in your hands and feet slowly subsiding into a dull ache. "Wine," he announces, rather grandly, as if offering a rare vintage. He pours a surprisingly generous measure into each cup, the dark liquid glugging from the jug. The aroma that reaches you is sharp, a little vinegary, but with an underlying fruitiness. It's certainly not the high-end Hippocras, spiced and sweetened, that nobility might sip, but it's a world away from the toxic sludge served in the hovel you so recently vacated. The mainstream historical fact here is that wine was a common daily drink for many in medieval Europe, often safer than water, and it came in a vast range of qualities from rough table wine to prized vintages. He carries the cups carefully, one in each trembling hand, and offers one to you. "It may not be what you scholars are accustomed to at the Sorbonne," he says, a hint of his earlier dryness returning to his tone, "but it will put some warmth back into your belly." You take the cup with grateful hands, which are still clumsy and shaking slightly, but now from fatigue and relief rather than just cold. "You are too kind, master," you murmur, and take a cautious sip. It's rough, yes, and decidedly unsophisticated, but it's strong, and the way it spreads a fiery warmth down your throat and into your chest is immediately comforting. It tastes like survival. You take another, larger gulp, nectar of the gods, considering the alternative was freezing to a human icicle. The old man sips his own wine more slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire, though you feel he is still acutely aware of your presence, your every move. He settles himself onto a tall, stern-looking wooden chair, which creaks in protest under his slight weight, positioning himself opposite you, with the fire between you. An uneasy truce, lubricated by cheap wine and shared warmth. For a while, neither of you speaks. The only sounds are the crackle and hiss of the logs in the fireplace, the occasional gust of wind rattling a distant shutter, a reminder of the fury still raging outside, and the sound of your own breathing, slowly returning to normal. The heat, the wine, The sheer relief of being indoors are working their magic. Your shivering has mostly stopped, and a profound weariness is beginning to settle over you, so deep it's almost blissful. "So, scholar," the old man eventually says, his voice a little less reedy now, perhaps warmed by the wine. "You were studying human nature, I believe you said? Observing its resilience in the face of adversity?" There's a definite glint of something, amusement, skepticism, in his eyes, amplified by the firelight. Oh dear, he remembered that particular piece of improvised nonsense. You feel a blush creep up your neck, a sensation you haven't felt for hours. A perhaps poorly chosen phrase in a moment of desperation, master, you admit, trying for a sheepish grin that probably just looks like a grimace. "My studies are usually of a more textual nature." "Ah, texts," he nods slowly. "The dead whispering to the living, a noble pursuit. And what texts occupy your keen intellect when you are not, shall we say, field-testing the limits of human endurance?" His persistence is surprising. You expected, perhaps hoped, he would simply let you thaw out in silence and then show you the door at the first sign of dawn. Instead, he seems inclined to converse. It's a curious turn. This old, reclusive man who clearly values his solitude is now engaging in philosophical sparring with a half-frozen vagrant he reluctantly rescued. Perhaps he's lonely. Perhaps he's eccentric. Or perhaps he's still trying to figure out if you're genuine, using conversation as a diagnostic tool. Historians still argue whether intellectual discourse across social classes was a rare oddity or a more common, if unrecorded, feature of medieval urban life. I have an interest in the classical poets, master, you venture, choosing a suitably vague and respectable field. Ovid, Virgil, the eternal verities of love, loss, and fate. You hope this sounds sufficiently highbrow. It's not entirely a lie. You did skim a few translated lines once, in a less reputable sort underscore of establishment. His eyes light up, a genuine spark this time. Ovid! Ah, a master of transformation! And Virgil, a guide through darkness! He takes another sip of wine, a thoughtful expression on his face. And what do these ancients tell you about a night like this, scholar? About fate, eh? Was it fate that blew you to my door, half dead and claiming the mantle of learning? The conversation is taking an unexpected turn. This isn't just polite chit-chat. He's probing, testing, perhaps even amusing himself at your expense. But there's also a keen intelligence there, a mind that has clearly spent many long hours in contemplation. It's like you've accidentally stumbled into an impromptu viva voce examination conducted by a cantankerous emeritus professor with your life as the potential grade. You take another fortifying swig of wine. This philosophical sparring is a far cry from dodging knives with Thevenin, but it has its own kind of pressure. You rally yourself, the wine and the warmth, having thawed not just your limbs, but also some of your wit. If this strange, ancient man wants a philosophical debate in the eye of a hurricane, then who are you, a humble and currently very indebted recipient of his charity, to refuse? Besides, it's infinitely preferable to discussing the finer points of your recent, rather unsavory acquaintances. Perhaps, master, you begin, choosing your words with a newfound, wine-emboldened care. It was not so much fate that blew me here, as the absence of it elsewhere. The fates, as Ovid tells us, spin, measure, and cut the thread of life. Tonight, it felt as though every other door in Paris was guarded by Atropos herself, shears at the ready. You try for a tone that blends scholarly illusion with a touch of your genuine, still lingering desperation. The old man chuckles, a dry, rasping sound, but a genuine chuckle nonetheless. A poetic evasion, scholar. You skirt the question of your own agency, or lack thereof. Were you merely a leaf in the storm, or did your own choices, your own path, lead you into its teeth? He leans forward slightly, his eyes surprisingly bright in their wrinkled nests, fixing on yours. He's enjoying this, you realize, this intellectual cat-and-mouse game. A bit of both, I suspect, master, you concede. Like all men, I am a tapestry woven of my own decisions and the vagaries of chance. Perhaps I made an unwise choice of route, or trusted in a forecast that proved optimistic. Understatement of the century, that one. Your forecast was essentially hoping for the best while expecting the worst, and getting something far exceeding even your grimmest expectations. Optimism, he scoffs, though not unkindly. A luxury for those whose bellies are full and whose roofs are sound. For the rest of us, realism is the more prudent companion, and the reality, as I saw it, was a half-frozen wretch on my doorstep, claiming kinship with the learned. A rather stark reality, wouldn't you agree? This is the crux of it, isn't it? His world, one of age, solitude, and presumably a certain cautious order, has been gate-crashed by your chaotic, desperate reality. He, the stern upholder of what he perceives as a kind of knightly, albeit solitary, honor and propriety, versus you, the embodiment of the rogue, the survivor, the man who will say or do what is necessary to see the next sunrise. Stark indeed, master, you agree, and I offer no excuse for my appearance, only my gratitude for your discerning charity. You raise your cup to him in a small salute. You chose to see beyond the freezing husk to whatever spark you deemed worthy of saving. He takes a slow sip of his wine, his gaze distant for a moment, as if looking back through the years. There was a time, he says softly, his voice losing some of its sharp edge, when this house saw many guests. Knights, nobles, men of action and renown. My father, he valued honor, courage, steadfastness. He would have understood a soldier battling the elements, a knight on a quest. He pauses, then looks at you directly. But a scholar? Blown about by the wind like a stray page from a forgotten book? That he would have found peculiar. The mainstream historical fact here is that the ideals of chivalry, while perhaps waning in strict military application by the mid-15th century, still held considerable sway in the cultural imagination, particularly among the older nobility. Codes of honor, duty, and martial prowess were highly valued. Peculiar, perhaps, you counter gently. But is not the pursuit of knowledge also a quest, master? A battle against ignorance? Against the dying of the light? Perhaps less overtly heroic than wielding a sword, but a battle nonetheless. You're actually starting to enjoy this verbal jousting. It's certainly more stimulating than trying to convince a locked door to open. A battle fought with ink and parchment rather than steel and sinew, he grumbles, but there's a reluctant respect in his tone. And what of your ethics, scholar? Your code? A knight has his vows, his obligations. What are yours? To truth? To whom do you owe your allegiance? This is getting deep. You think of Villon, his cynical wit, his casual violence, his utterly pragmatic approach to survival. Was that a code? An allegiance to self, perhaps? You decide a more palatable answer is required. My allegiance, master, is to understanding, to seeing the world as it is, in all its beauty and its ugliness. You deliberately meet his gaze. Tonight, I have seen much of the latter, but I have also seen unexpected kindness, a flicker of warmth in the deepest cold. The old man stares into the fire for a long moment, the flames reflecting in his ancient eyes. The world is a harsh place, scholar, he says finally, harsh and often unjust. A man of honor strives to create a small space of order, of decency around himself. He protects what is his, he upholds his word, he does not suffer fools or knaves gladly. You get the distinct impression he's not just talking abstractly now, but of his own fiercely held principles. Principles that led him, however grudgingly, to open his door to you. And yet, master, you press, feeling a surge of something akin to empathy for this lonely old man. Can honor alone keep out the cold? Can a rigid code encompass all the messy, unpredictable realities of life? Sometimes survival itself becomes the highest virtue, overriding all others. Sometimes one must adapt, bend, even dissemble, simply to endure. You think of your own lies, your desperate improvisations tonight. Were they dishonorable or merely necessary? Historians still argue whether the rigid codes of chivalry and honor so prominent in literature were ever truly lived up to by the majority, or if they represented an ideal often compromised by harsh realities and human frailty. Your host seems to be a man wrestling with that very tension. He lives by a knight's honor in a rogue's world, And you are undoubtedly from that rogue's world. The old nobleman, for by his manner and the fated grandeur of his hall, you feel certain that is what he must be, however reduced his circumstances, looks at you with a new intensity. Your last words, suggesting the occasional necessity of bending rules, of dissembling for survival, seem to have struck a chord, or perhaps a nerve. His deeply etched frown lines seem to carve themselves even deeper in the firelight. Adapt? Bend? Dissemble? He repeats slowly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Those are the excuses of the weak scholar, the refuge of the man without principle. A true man of honor stands firm, though the heavens fall. He does not haggle with circumstance. His voice, though frail, rings with an unwavering conviction, the conviction of a lifetime spent clinging to a rigid, perhaps now outdated code. It's like listening to a dinosaur explain the merits of a strictly herbivorous diet while a meteor streaks across the sky. And yet, master, you persist, emboldened by the wine, the warmth, and a strange sense of having nothing left to lose. What if the heavens have already fallen? What if the world is not the ordered place your honorable father knew, but a chaotic marketplace where principles are bartered for a warm meal or a safe night's lodging? You gesture vaguely around you, encompassing your own wretched state as evidence. If a man holds so rigidly to his honor that he freezes to death, what good is that honor then, except as a cold epitaph? He bangs his pewter cup on the small table beside his chair, making the dregs of wine slosh. "It is good in itself," he retorts, a surprising fire flaring in his ancient eyes. "It is the measure of a man. Better to die with honor intact than to live a life of compromise and expediency." The philosophical gulf between you is vast, a chasm carved by age, experience, and radically different circumstances. He speaks of ideals forged in a more certain, or at least more idealized past. You speak from the raw, brutal present of gutters and desperate gambits. You see the lean, pragmatic face of Villon in your mind's eye, a man who would likely scoff at such pronouncements, probably while picking your pocket. "Perhaps, master," you say. Your voice softer now, more conciliatory. Perhaps, but for those of us less stalwart, less blessed with fortitude, the simple act of drawing breath from one day to the next can feel like a victory in itself, regardless of the compromises made along the way. You look into the dying embers of the fire. The great logs have burned down, leaving a bed of glowing coals that pulses with a fading heat, much like your own energy. The intellectual sparring, though invigorating for a time, has taken its toll. The old man seems to deflate it slightly, the fire in him banking down along with the one in the hearth. He sighs, a long, weary exhalation. "You are young," he says, not unkindly. "You have the resilience of youth, even if it is misapplied. Perhaps you will learn. Or perhaps," he adds, a touch of his old cynicism returning, "you will simply continue to stumble from one misfortune to another, quoting Ovid to excuse your scrapes." A long silence falls, punctuated only by the wind, which still growls outside, though perhaps with a little less fury than before. Or maybe you're just too exhausted to register its full menace. The warmth of the hall, the dregs of the wine, and the sheer fatigue from your ordeal are making your eyelids impossibly heavy. The first hint of dawn is beginning to seep through the high, narrow windows. Not light, exactly, but a subtle lessening of the oppressive blackness. A pale, gray, unwelcoming light that promises a cold and cheerless morning. The storm has broken, or at least abated for now. Your host seems to notice it too. He rises stiffly from his chair, his joints creaking almost audibly. "Daylight approaches," he announces, his voice once again that of the reserved, slightly disapproving master of the house. "The city will soon be stirring. It is time for you to leave, scholar." There's no malice in his tone now, just a weary finality. The strange interlude is over. The unexpected sanctuary, the impromptu philosophical debate, all drawing to a close with the rising sun. You feel a pang of something that might be regret, or perhaps just a reluctance to face the cold, hard reality of the Parisian streets again, even without the blizzard. You struggle to your feet, your limbs stiff and sore, but blessedly, no longer frozen. "Master," you say, bowing your head slightly, I I have no words to thank you. You showed me mercy when all others showed me a locked door. He waves a dismissive age-spotted hand. Tush! It was little enough. A fire, a cup of wine, perhaps a moment's diversion from an old man's solitude. He shuffles towards the passage that leads to the outer door, expecting you to follow. As he fumbles with the bars, he pauses and turns back to you. He reaches into a pouch at his belt, a pouch you hadn't noticed before, and extracts a single small silver coin. He presses it into your hand. For your scholarly pursuits, he says, his lips twitching with what might almost be a smile. Perhaps it will buy you a more substantial breakfast than philosophical debate provides. A quirky, fringe tidbit for you. The actual purchasing power of a small silver coin like a Blanc or Gros in 1450s Paris could secure a few loaves of bread or a decent tavern meal. So it wasn't an insignificant gesture for a man who clearly wasn't living in lavish luxury himself. You look at the coin, then at him, genuinely touched by this unexpected generosity. Master, Go now, he says, cutting you off, his voice gruff but not unkind. He pulls the door open. The air that wafts in is bitingly cold, but the wind has died down considerably. The world outside is blanketed in a thick, pristine layer of fresh snow, sparkling faintly in the pre-dawn gray. It's a world transformed, beautiful and silent, but still deeply unwelcoming. You step out onto the threshold, then turn back one last time. May your God bless you, sir, you say quietly. He merely nods, then slowly, deliberately closes the heavy oak door. The sound of the bars sliding home echoes in the sudden quiet. You are alone once more, but this time you face not a raging storm, but the pale, chill light of a new day, a single coin in your pocket, and the memory of a strange, reluctant kindness in the heart of a merciless city. The path ahead is uncertain, the city still a labyrinth of potential dangers and meager opportunities. The events of the night, the desperate flight, the sudden violence, the unexpected sanctuary, feel like a fever dream, sharp and vivid yet already receding as the pragmatic needs of the day begin to assert themselves. Food, warmth, a place to lie low perhaps, until the memory of Thevenen's demise fades from the immediate concerns of the watch. Villain, ox, parchment. You wonder briefly what became of them, if they too survived the storm's icy clutches and the city's unyielding streets. But their fates are no longer tied to yours. You pull your still damp cloak tighter around you, the old nobleman's coin a small, cold comfort in your palm. The air is crisp, clean, and unforgiving. The snow muffles all sound, creating an almost ethereal stillness. You take a breath, the icy air a shock to your lungs, then another. You are alive. Against considerable odds, you have made it through the night. The conversation with your strange benefactor lingers in your mind. His talk of honor, your own fumbling attempts at justifying a more pragmatic, perhaps less noble path. You are still unsure who was right, or if such questions even have answers when survival is the only imperative. But his final small act of generosity, that single silver coin, seems to bridge the gap between his world and yours, a small, tangible piece of unexpected grace. Slowly, cautiously, you begin to walk, your boots crunching on the fresh snow, leaving the first new tracks in this silent white world. The weariness is a heavy cloak on your shoulders, but beneath it, a tiny, resilient ember of hope, or perhaps just sheer stubbornness, continues to glow. The city is waking, and you, a very minor, very battered scholar of human nature, are, for now, a part of it once more.